Beatrice Collins was halfway behind the Coldwater livery when the giant rancher she had crossed Colorado to marry stepped into view. And instead of stopping her escape, he held out enough money to send her home. "I can't marry," she said, gripping her worn freight office satchel. William Harper stayed several yards away, leaving the alley open behind him. "Then you won't." The stage dust still hung over Coldwater Crossing. Horses stamped behind rough plank walls as William offered her 4 days, a room with a lock, and the freedom to leave afterward. But across the yard, another man had noticed the faded company name on Beatrice's satchel. And suddenly, whether she stayed or left was not the only question. Would you have taken William's offer? Or walked straight back to the station? Stay with us and see what Beatrice chooses. The stagecoach had barely stopped when Beatrice Collins decided she was not going to marry William Harper. She remained seated while the other passengers climbed down into the cold September afternoon. Through the scratched window she could see Coldwater Crossing, one muddy main street, a blacksmith shop coughing smoke, a livery yard crowded with freight wagons, and the blue-gray shoulders of the San Juan Mountains rising beyond the valley. Then she saw him. William Harper stood beneath the freight shed across the road. He was taller than any man Beatrice had ever met. 6'7", perhaps, broad through the shoulders, wearing a brown work coat faded at the elbows and a black hat that had seen several Colorado winters. He wasn't scowling. He wasn't smiling either. He simply waited. That somehow made it worse. Beatrice tightened both hands around her worn leather satchel. For 3 weeks, that bag had stayed within reach. It held 2 dresses, a hairbrush, her old freight office papers, $11.40, and the few things left from a life in Kansas City that had disappeared faster than she had believed possible. Mr. Talbot had died in June. By August, his wagon freight office had closed. Beatrice had spent years copying manifests, checking feed bills, and sorting receipts there. None of that mattered when the doors were locked. Then William Harper's advertisement had appeared. A Colorado rancher, 43, no children, seeking an educated woman willing to consider marriage. Travel expenses provided, she had answered. Now she wondered what kind of desperate woman crossed half the country because of 6 lines printed in a newspaper. "Coldwater Crossing," the driver called. Beatrice stepped down. Mountain wind caught her gray traveling skirt at once. She steadied her hat and glanced across the street. William was speaking to the station clerk. This was her chance. She walked toward the livery yard, then faster. She passed a wagon stacked with flour sacks, slipped behind a row of hitching posts, and turned into the narrow lane between the livery and a feed warehouse. There was a boarding house somewhere near the south end of town. She could pay for 1 night. In the morning, she would find a stage headed toward Denver. From there, somehow, she would get back to Kansas City, Miss Collins. Beatrice stopped. William Harper stood at the far end of the lane. She hadn't heard him follow. He removed his hat. That simple gesture unsettled her more than anger would have. He remained several yards away, leaving the path beside him open. Beatrice lifted her chin. "I can't marry you," a horse stamped inside the livery. Somewhere behind them a hammer rang against an anvil. William studied her for a moment. "Then you won't." Beatrice blinked. "What?" "I said you won't." There was no sharpness in his voice. It was low and plain, like a man discussing the weather. "You came a long way," he said. "Doesn't mean you owe me a wedding." She had prepared herself for arguments, for talk of the fare he'd paid, for promises that she had misunderstood him. Instead, William reached slowly inside his coat. Beatrice stiffened, he noticed. His hand stopped. "Envelope," he said. Only after she nodded did he take it out. He held it toward her but did not step closer. Beatrice crossed the space herself and took it. Money, she counted enough for the journey east. Her eyes lifted sharply. "What's this? Your fare home. You already paid to bring me here. That wasn't a loan." Beatrice looked down at the bills again. William put his hat back on. "The eastbound connection doesn't come through until Monday. 4 days. It was Thursday. I checked this morning," he continued. "Mrs. Dyer has a room at the boarding house. I paid through Monday in case you wanted it." Beatrice stared at him. "And if I don't? My ranch is 9 miles north. Guest room's yours if you'd rather stay there. Door locks from inside." His gaze stayed level with hers. "Monday morning, I'll bring you back here." "And what happens during those 4 days? You eat, sleep, look around. And marriage? Nothing happens about marriage unless you say it does." For the first time since leaving Kansas City, Beatrice had no prepared answer. William stepped aside. The lane was open, so was the road beyond it. "You can choose the boarding house," he said. "Or Broken Spur. Either way, Miss Collins, Monday belongs to you." Beatrice looked toward the main street. $11.40 had seemed like a little security in Kansas City. Out here, it felt like the difference between having choices and having none. She slipped William's envelope into her satchel. 4 days. He nodded. 4. Separate room. Yes. The lock? Only key is yours. She studied his face for any hint of amusement. There was none. I'll see the ranch. William merely said, "All right." He took her trunk from the station himself. Beatrice noticed another man watching as William tied it behind the wagon. He was perhaps 50, neatly dressed in a dark vest beneath a heavy coat. Unlike the ranch hands nearby, his boots were polished. His eyes settled not on Beatrice's face but on the faded lettering stamped into her satchel. "Talbot Wagon Freight, Kansas City." The man turned to the station clerk. Beatrice couldn't hear the first question. She heard the second. "How long's she staying?" The clerk shrugged. William climbed onto the wagon seat. "Ready?" Beatrice looked once more at the stranger. He was still watching. Then he smiled politely and touched 2 fingers to his hat. Beatrice climbed aboard. The wagon rolled north out of Coldwater Crossing. For the first mile, neither she nor William spoke. The road followed a creek through yellow grass and stands of cottonwood already turning gold. Farther west, clouds rested against the San Juan peaks. The air smelled of dry sage, horse sweat, and coming cold. A gust came down the valley. Beatrice rubbed her hands together. William reached behind the seat. She tensed before she could stop herself. He pulled out a folded wool blanket. Instead of laying it across her knees, he placed it on the bench between them. Wind gets colder after the ridge. Beatrice waited. He returned both hands to the reins. After another 100 yards, she took the blanket herself. "Thank you, ma'am. That was all." Broken Spur Ranch appeared near sundown. It was not the grand property she had half expected from a man able to advertise for a wife hundreds of miles away. It was working land. A long barn leaned slightly where its roof needed repair. One stretch of rail fence had been braced with fresh-cut posts. Saddles hung beneath an overhang to dry. 2 ranch hands were stacking feed sacks, while another patched a wagon wheel beside the shed. The house itself was sturdy, 2 stories, built from squared timber with a stone chimney and a porch facing west. William jumped down. When Beatrice prepared to climb from the wagon, he raised one hand automatically, then stopped. He let it fall. Beatrice understood what he was doing. She climbed down herself. William carried her trunk inside. The house smelled faintly of coffee, leather, and pine smoke. Muddy boots stood in a straight line near the back door. A cattle tally was pinned beside the kitchen cupboard. A chipped blue mug sat upside down near the wash basin. Nothing looked arranged to impress a bride. William led her upstairs. The guest room contained a narrow iron bed, a wool quilt, a washstand, 1 straight-back chair, and a window overlooking the barn. He set her trunk beside the bed, then pointed toward the dresser. A brass key lay there. Only key to that lock. Beatrice picked it up. William moved toward the door. Supper's at 7. Kitchen's downstairs if you'd rather eat alone. He paused. Well, pump sticks sometimes. Lift the handle before you push down. Then he left. Beatrice listened to his boots descend the stairs. She closed the door, locked it. The brass mechanism gave a solid click. Only then did she breathe out. That night she ate at the kitchen table after William had gone to check a mare in the barn. She washed her plate, carried a lamp upstairs, and placed her satchel beneath her pillow. 4 days. She could manage 4 days. Near midnight, a hard gust rattled the window. Something struck the floor downstairs. Beatrice sat up. Another scrape followed. She took the lamp and went down. The kitchen was empty. Cold air had slipped through a window William had left cracked above the sink. Several papers had blown from a shelf beside the pantry. Beatrice crouched to gather them. Feed receipts, a horseshoe account, an invoice. She almost stacked it with the others. Then her hand stopped. Mercer Freight and Provision, 16 sacks of oats. Freight charge from Coldwater Crossing to Broken Spur. Beatrice read the total, then read it again. Years of freight office work had taught her that numbers could lie, but they rarely lied gracefully. She carried the invoice closer to the lamp. Someone had charged William Harper twice for the same load. Beatrice stood alone in the dark kitchen, the paper held between her fingers. Outside, the wind moved across Broken Spur Ranch, and for the first time since arriving in Colorado, she forgot to think about Monday. Beatrice carried the invoice back to the kitchen table and set the lamp beside it. 16 sacks of oats, 1 freight charge from Coldwater Crossing to Broken Spur, then another line beneath it, written in the same careful hand, charging the same distance again. She leaned closer. It was not enough to accuse anyone. Not yet. By the time she returned upstairs, the eastern sky had begun to pale behind the ridge. William was gone before sunrise. On the kitchen stove sat a blackened coffee pot. Beside it, half a loaf of bread had been wrapped in a flour sack cloth. A scrap of paper lay under a chipped blue mug. Horse water is good. Well, pump sticks. Beatrice read the note twice. No good morning. No question about whether she'd slept. No attempt to sit across from her and act like a courting man. She poured coffee and stood at the window while she drank it. Across the yard, one of the ranch hands led 2 bay horses toward the lower pasture. Frost silvered the rails nearest the barn. Somewhere beyond the house, an axe struck wood in a slow, even rhythm. William returned near 9. He came through the back door carrying a coil of rawhide and a broken harness strap. Mud darkened the knees of his trousers. Beatrice was waiting at the table. The Mercer invoice lay between them. William looked at it, then at her. You lose something? No. She tapped the paper. You paid twice for 1 load of oats. His eyes dropped. Did I? You tell me? He pulled out a chair, but the thing looked too small under him. He sat anyway. Beatrice pointed to the 2 freight lines. Same date, same wagon number, same 16 sacks. William frowned. Mercer sent 1 wagon that week. Then you're being charged twice. He did not argue. That surprised her. Instead, he rubbed one thumb along the edge of the paper. I don't keep the books as close as I ought. How close do you keep them? Close enough to know when calves are missing. Not close enough for this. Beatrice sat opposite him. What do you know? William looked toward the pantry shelf. Last winter was hard. Hay ran short. I bought oats, lamp oil, salt, fencing wire. Mercer let me carry it on credit. How much? Enough that I'm still paying. Beatrice folded her hands. 1 bad bill can be a mistake. William waited. 6 are a pattern. He rose. For 1 second, she thought he had taken offense. Instead, he went to the cupboard beside the back door and lifted out a wooden box with brass corners. It was heavier than it looked. He placed it on the table, receipts, opened the lid. Inside were folded invoices, feed slips, supply tallies, handwritten notes, and promissory receipts held together with bits of string. She looked up. This all of it? Since January. William picked up the broken harness strap. I'll be in the tack room. He moved toward the door, then stopped. You needed anything? Quiet. One corner of his mouth shifted. That I can manage. He left. Beatrice worked until noon. The first mistake took 20 minutes. The second took less. A barley shipment from August appeared on 2 separate invoices, both carrying the same wagon number. She found mileage charges that made no sense. Coldwater crossing to Broken Spur was 9 miles by the wagon road. Mercer had billed 17. On another sheet, 12 sacks of feed had been delivered. The barn tally showed 10. The invoice charged 15. Then she noticed something else. 3 separate bills carried the same odd formation in the number 7. A heavy downward stroke, then a faint hook at the bottom. Same clerk, same hand, same errors. When William came in for water, Beatrice had arranged 6 pages in a row. He stood behind the empty chair instead of coming close. How bad? Bad enough. She showed him the duplicated barley, then the mileage, then the feed counts. William's jaw tightened. He did not swear. He only asked, "You sure?" Beatrice looked at him. I spent 8 years checking wagon accounts. His eyes met hers. Then I'm sure. That answer landed differently than praise would have. William pulled out the chair. Show me. She did, for almost an hour. He listened. Really listened. He asked plain questions when he did not understand, and did not pretend otherwise. When Beatrice explained how freight clerks matched wagon numbers against delivery slips, William reached for a pencil and made notes in the margin. His handwriting was large and blunt. "You're not very good with figures," she said. "No. You admit that easily. I'm 6'7". Admitting arithmetic beat me won't make me shorter." Beatrice looked down before he could see the smile forming. Later that afternoon, they rode into Coldwater Crossing for horseshoes and to confirm Monday's stage. William gave her a sorrel mare named June. He adjusted the stirrup leather, then stepped back. "You ride? Enough." He nodded. No hand at her waist. No hovering, just space. Coldwater Crossing looked different in daylight. The blacksmith shop stood open to the road, sparks flashing near the forge. Edwin Foster, a broad man with gray whiskers, spotted William first. Big Harper. William ducked under the shop beam. "Edwin." Edwin glanced at Beatrice. "So this is Miss Collins?" Beatrice raised a brow. "News travels fast, faster than freight and twice as crooked." William sighed. Edwin grinned. "He can stand quiet long enough to make a man confess to things he hasn't done." "That true?" Beatrice asked. William looked at the horseshoe rack. Edwin talks when he ought to breathe. She almost laughed. At the general store, a boy dropped a wooden crate near the front step. William caught one side before it split open and lifted the whole thing onto the porch as though it held feathers. The boy ran for help. William was already walking away. Inside, Beatrice waited near the counter while a widow named Martha Bell counted coins into her palm. She was short by 11 cents for a sack of flour. "Put the flour back," Martha said quietly. The storekeeper hesitated. After she left, William leaned toward him. "Add it to Broken Spur." The storekeeper nodded. Beatrice had seen. William saw that she had seen. His expression closed slightly. "You don't like being thanked?" she asked outside. "Not for something that doesn't cost me much. It cost you 11 cents. He looked at her. "Then don't tell Martha," that was all. At the freight office, papers covered nearly every flat surface. Arthur Wells was 38, lean, ink-stained at the cuffs, and clearly losing a private war against winter manifests. When he learned what Beatrice had done in Kansas City, his whole face changed. "You know freight accounts?" "Yes. Proper accounts. Depends what you call proper." He pushed a stack toward her. These aren't. William remained by the doorway. Arthur looked from him to Beatrice. If you decide to stay in Coldwater, I could use someone 2 or 3 days a week through winter. Beatrice went still. Bod work wouldn't insult you with anything else. On the ride back to Broken Spur, the mountains had turned purple under the falling sun. Beatrice finally said, Arthur offered me work. William kept his eyes on the road. I heard. You don't mind? Why would I? I came here because of your advertisement. That doesn't mean your life has to shrink to fit it. She looked at him. Take it if you want it. The mare's reins shifted in her hands. For the first time, staying in Colorado did not mean marrying William Harper. That thought frightened her less than it should have. That night, Beatrice returned to the wooden box. William repaired harness by the stove. They worked without talking much. When the lamp burned low, he disappeared into the pantry. A moment later, he set a fresh bottle of lamp oil beside her, then a mug of coffee. He did not ask how long she planned to work. He simply went back to the leather strap. Near 10, Beatrice found the promissory note. She unfolded it slowly. $1,670. Her eyes moved down the page. Collateral in the event of default, North Bench winter pasture. Payment due by the end of November. William. Something in her voice made him put the harness down. He crossed the room. She handed him the paper. You know about this? His gaze moved over the amount. I signed a note. For this much? No. How much? He rubbed the back of his neck. Closer to 1,100. Beatrice drew the lamp nearer. The signature looked genuine. The upper portion of the document did too, but the clause involving North Bench had been written with a narrower nib. The ink was darker, slightly newer. She touched the edge of the page. Don't say anything to Mercer yet. William's hand closed around the back of the chair. Why? Because I don't know enough. He waited. She looked up at him. Somebody changed this after your name went on it. William did not move. The big hand gripping the chair tightened until the wood creaked once. Not rage, control, then he released it. Beatrice went to her satchel. I kept handwriting samples from Talbot's office. Old receipts, clerk's copies. Sometimes the same companies passed freight through Kansas City. She opened the inner pocket. A folded receipt slipped free and landed face up on the floor. Beatrice bent to pick it up, then stopped. At the top was the company name, Mercer Freight and Provision. Below it, Red Willow Road Timber Shipment. William came closer. Beatrice read the date, then read it again. Her pulse changed. This can't be right. What? She handed him the paper. You told me Mercer claimed Red Willow became his private road last year. That's right. This timber shipment went through nearly a year before that. William studied the receipt. Beatrice looked toward the dark window. The mountains beyond it had vanished into night. Something she had carried all the way from Kansas City had just reached back into Colorado and touched William Harper's land. Monday suddenly felt very far away. By breakfast, the old receipt lay beside William's coffee cup. Beatrice had slept little. William had slept less. She could tell by the way he stood at the kitchen window, with one hand braced against the frame, looking toward the north pasture, as if the answer might be written somewhere in the frost. Red Willow Road, Beatrice said. William turned. Show me. They rode out after sunrise. The trail north of Broken Spur narrowed between low hills where rabbit brush leaned silver in the wind. Farther on, the land dropped toward Red Willow Ford, a broad, shallow crossing used by freight wagons coming into Coldwater Valley from the south. Beatrice saw wagon ruts hardened into the bank. William pointed with one gloved hand. Freight line comes over that ridge, crosses here, then splits west toward Coldwater and north toward the ranches. And Mercer controls this? He says he owns the road approach and the strip beyond it. He charges for passage, not always in cash. Beatrice looked at him. Debt? William nodded. If a rancher owes him for winter supplies, Mercer can make freight a lot harder until the account gets settled. They dismounted near the water. Beatrice crouched at the edge of the ford and studied the old timber cribbing under the bank. Some boards were weathered gray. Others had been replaced. This receipt says timber came through Talbot's office before Mercer claimed the road. William folded his arms. You think he was building here before he owned it? I think we don't know what he owned. William's eyes went toward the ridge. Then we go to the sheriff. His gaze returned to her. No, not yet. We've got an altered note. We've got a note that looks altered, and a receipt that raises a question. William's jaw worked once. Beatrice stood. If you accuse Calvin Mercer now, he gets to prepare before we know what we're asking. I don't much care if he prepares. I do. The words came sharper than she intended. William went still. Beatrice softened her voice. One bad page isn't proof. We need the original filing, or a witness, or another record that connects the road to the money. For a long moment, William said nothing. The river moved over stones behind them. Then he nodded. All right. That simple answer mattered more than Beatrice wanted it to. He was listening, not because she was a guest, because she knew something he did not. They spent the rest of the morning tracing the old wagon road. William knew where fences had stood 10 years earlier, which ranchers had sold out, and which Ben's freight crews avoided in spring mud. Beatrice carried a small notebook inside her coat and wrote down names, land, dates, distances. Noon, they stopped by a fence line on the northern edge of Broken Spur. William had brought June for her again. When a jackrabbit burst from the brush, the mare jumped sideways. Beatrice's reins slipped. William's horse moved toward her at once. He did not grab the bridle. He did not reach across. He only came close enough that she could hear him. Sit deep. Beatrice steadied herself. June settled. William nodded once. You had her. Beatrice gave him a look. You were ready to catch me. I was ready if you asked. She looked away before he saw how much that answer pleased her. That evening, William burned the biscuits. Beatrice noticed the smell first. You planning to feed those to cattle? William opened the oven. Smoke rolled out. He stared at the blackened tray. I've done better, have you? No, she laughed, a real laugh. William looked at her as though he had never heard the sound before. Then, slowly, he laughed too. For a few minutes, the kitchen changed. The invoices remained stacked near the lamp. The promissory note was still there. Mercer was still somewhere in Coldwater. But the house no longer felt like a place where Beatrice was waiting to leave. Later, on the porch, the air had turned cold enough to sting. William brought her coat. He held it open. Beatrice stepped backward into it. His hands came near her shoulders, stopped. She could feel his warmth behind her without being touched. When she turned, they stood closer than either had intended. William looked down. Beatrice looked up. Neither moved. Then she heard the distant whistle of a freight wagon from the valley road. Monday, tomorrow. She stepped back. William lowered his hands. Tomorrow still belongs to you. Beatrice held his gaze. I know. Morning came clear and hard. William loaded her valise onto the wagon. He had packed food for the ride into town. He had also folded the wool blanket and placed it on the bench. Nothing in his manner asked her to stay. That hurt more than Beatrice expected. Coldwater Crossing was already busy when they arrived. Arthur Wells came out of the freight office at a run, waving a folded paper. Harper William pulled the wagon to a stop. Arthur handed him the notice. County clerk sent this over first thing. William read it. His face changed. Beatrice reached for the page. Default claim, Mercer, Freight and Provision, North Bench. 23 days before seizure proceedings. William folded the notice once, then he looked at her valise. Stage leaves in 20 minutes. Beatrice stared at him. That's what you have to say? You should get on it. William, you've done enough. His voice stayed quiet. This isn't yours to carry. Something inside Beatrice tightened. 4 days ago, those words might have sounded like kindness. Now she heard the other thing beneath them. Decision, his decision, about her. You told me I was free. You are. Then stop deciding what I do with it. William's eyes shifted. Not anger, recognition. Beatrice climbed down from the wagon. She did not go toward the stage. She carried her valise across the road to Wells' freight office. Arthur looked from her to William. I've got a room above the office, he said carefully. Small, but dry. Beatrice nodded. I'll take it. William said nothing. He lifted the valise from the wagon himself and set it beside her. For 1 second, his hand rested on the handle. Then he let go. All right, that was all. He climbed back onto the wagon. Beatrice watched him turn Broken Spur's team toward the north road. He did not look back. By afternoon, she was working at Arthur's desk. The room above the freight office had one narrow bed, one washstand, and a window overlooking the alley. It was enough. More important, it was hers. Arthur gave Beatrice access to old county copies stored in a cabinet behind the main desk. She spent hours comparing dates. Near dusk, she found a bundle of correspondence tied with blue string. Mercer, Broken Spur. One letter carried William's name. Beatrice opened it, then sat very still. The letter was dated weeks before William's marriage advertisement had appeared. It referenced late payments, winter credit, possible claim against North Bench. William had known, not every detail, but enough. Beatrice folded the letter and put on her coat. She reached Broken Spur after dark. William opened the door before she knocked twice. He looked at the paper in her hand, then at her face. What is it? You knew. William did not pretend not to understand. His shoulders lowered. Yes, before you wrote the advertisement. Yes. Beatrice stepped inside because the wind was rising behind her. William closed the door. She placed the letter on the kitchen table. You told me you wanted a wife. I did. You did not tell me you might lose part of the ranch. No. Why? William's mouth tightened. I thought I'd handle it. Beatrice gave a short, disbelieving breath. Before or after I married you. Before, if I could. And if you couldn't. He had no quick answer. That hurt more. Beatrice looked around the kitchen, the chipped blue mug, the receipts, the lamp he had filled for her. All those quiet acts now sat beside one thing he had chosen not to say. You didn't know what work I did? No. You didn't know about the Mercer receipt? No. Didn't choose me because you thought I could save the books? William stepped closer, then stopped himself. No. Beatrice believed him. That was almost worse, because the lie was smaller than betrayal and deeper than deceit. He had not used her, he had simply decided what truth she could bear. You didn't lie in the letter. William's eyes dropped. Beatrice folded the correspondence. You just decided what truth I needed. He looked back at her. There was pain in his face now. No excuse, no defense. I was trying to keep it from becoming your burden. You don't get to choose that for me. I know, you know now. William said nothing. Beatrice waited. Part of her wanted him to stop her, to say something grand enough to mend what had broken. He did not. She walked to the door. William opened it, then stepped aside. The road back to Coldwater was dark. Beatrice rode it alone. The next morning, Arthur handed her an envelope. Harper left this before sunrise. Beatrice took it upstairs. Inside was the rest of her return fare. Payment for every hour she had spent working through Broken Spur's accounts, and one folded note. She read it once, then again. You were right. I had no right to choose what you were allowed to know. Nothing else. No come back. No I miss you. No I love you. Beatrice sat on the edge of the narrow bed, with the note resting in her lap. Outside, freight wagons rattled through Coldwater Crossing. For the first time since meeting William Harper, she understood that his silence could wound, but it could also mean he had finally listened. The first snow came 3 mornings later. It did not stay long in Coldwater Crossing. By noon, wagon wheels had turned the street to brown slush, and water dripped steadily from the freight office roof. But up along the San Juan foothills, the ridges remained white. Beatrice saw them every time she looked out the upstairs window. She did not go back to Broken Spur. William did not come looking for her. Arthur Wells gave her half the desk nearest the stove and a drawer for her pencils, blotting paper, and account books. By the end of the week, Beatrice had straightened 3 months of winter manifests and found 2 customers who had been charged for feed sacks they never received. That should have been enough to keep her mind occupied. It wasn't. Some evenings, while she balanced Arthur's ledgers, she remembered the chipped blue mug at Broken Spur, or the brass key on the dresser, or William standing beside June after the mare shied, close enough to help but waiting for her to ask. Those memories irritated her. They also stayed. Arthur noticed more than he said. One afternoon he carried in a bundle of old freight records wrapped in canvas. Found these under the back stairs. Beatrice looked up. How old? 10 years, maybe more. She untied the bundle. By supper, she had forgotten the cold room above her. The old Mercer receipt from Kansas City lay beside her elbow. She compared it line by line against freight entries from Coldwater. Timber, iron spikes, wagon hire, labor. Then she found it, a payment notation in an older road ledger, Territorial Road Fund. Beatrice pulled the lamp closer. The same timber listed on the Mercer receipt had been paid for with public road money. She read the entry again, then a third time. Arthur came around the desk. What? Mercer didn't build Red Willow Road with his own money. Arthur frowned. Then whose? The Territories. Silence settled over the office. Outside, a mule team rattled past. Beatrice ran one finger beneath the faded line. If public money paid for the approach and crossing, Mercer may not have had the right to claim it as private freight access. Arthur leaned closer. Can you prove that? Not with this. She turned the page. A clerk's notation had been squeezed into the margin. RW survey duplicate. Cedar Relay. Arthur whistled softly. Cedar Relay. You know it? Know of it. Old storehouse upriver. Closed years ago. Where? Arthur shook his head. Never been there. Beatrice already knew who had. By late afternoon, she was riding north. The cold sharpened as she left town. Snow remained in the shadows beneath cottonwoods, and the road hardened under June's hooves. Broken Spur looked quieter than she remembered. A canvas sheet covered one side of the haystack. Several yearlings were gone from the lower pasture. William was beside the barn, stitching a tear in another length of canvas with heavy sail thread. He looked up when she approached. He did not smile. He did not ask why she had come. He only set the needle down. Beatrice dismounted. I need to find Cedar Relay. William's eyes moved to the ledger tucked beneath her coat, then toward the western ridge. Clouds had begun gathering there. Cedar Relay's 12 miles above Red Willow. You can find it? Yes. Arthur can't. William looked at the sky again. Storm will be down by tomorrow night. Beatrice waited. She saw the old habit cross his face before he spoke. The urge to tell her no, to decide. William drew a slow breath. Do you want me with you? The question landed quietly between them. Beatrice held his gaze. Yes, William nodded. I'll have horses ready at first light. No apology, no speech. He had already given the apology. This was something else. Change. At sunrise, Arthur rode with them. So did Deputy Marshal Lewis Grant, a lean 47-year-old man with a gray wool coat and a habit of chewing clove stems instead of tobacco. If we find a public record, Lewis said, I witness where it came from. Nobody gets to say Harper planted it. William gave a short nod. That's the idea. The old road to Cedar Relay had nearly disappeared. They followed the river first, then climbed above Red Willow Ford through pine and scrub oak. In places, William dismounted and walked ahead, studying old wheel scars cut into exposed stone. Beatrice watched him choose each turn. He knew this country the way she knew handwriting. Near noon, Cedar Relay came into view, or what remained of it. A sagging storehouse stood beside the abandoned wagon track, half buried under pine needles. A freight wagon was already there, so was Calvin Mercer. 2 laborers were pulling boards from the south wall. Beatrice reined June to a stop. Calvin looked up. His expression changed when he saw the 4 riders. Harper William dismounted. Mercer. Calvin dusted his gloves together. This structure sits inside my freight claim. Lewis Grant swung down from his horse. Then you won't mind if we look at the county material before you tear it apart. Calvin's jaw tightened. I mind plenty. Beatrice moved past him. The interior smelled of old wood, mouse nests, and cold earth. Broken shelving leaned against one wall. She opened drawers. Nothing. Arthur checked a warped cabinet near the back. Nothing. Outside, Calvin's workers resumed pulling nails. Every hammer strike made Beatrice move faster. She ran her hand along the wall behind a shelf. One board sounded different. Hollow. William. He came inside. Beatrice pointed. Can you move this without breaking it? William examined the shelf, then lifted the entire frame away from the wall. No flourish, no strain shown, just careful control. Behind it was a narrow plank panel. Arthur pried one edge loose with his pocket knife. Inside lay a flat oilcloth packet. Beatrice's hands went cold. She opened it on an overturned crate. Survey notebook, territory road authorization, witness list, measurements from Red Willow Ford to the county road. Arthur let out a breath. That's it. Calvin stepped through the doorway. That's company property. Beatrice closed her hand over the notebook. Lewis moved nearer. I watched her take it from the wall. Calvin looked at William. North Bench is gone in 3 weeks. You know that. William said nothing. Give me the papers. William stepped between Calvin and the crate. He did not touch his gun. He did not raise his voice. At 6'7", he did not need to. Mrs. Collins found it in the presence of a deputy. Calvin looked up at him. William's tone remained even. You'll wait. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Lewis took custody of the packet. By the time they rode back toward Coldwater, snow had begun falling in thin, dry flakes. The county hearing took place 4 days later in a room above the general store. Every bench was full. Ranchers stood along the wall. Calvin sat beside his attorney. William sat alone until Beatrice entered. He did not motion for her to join him. She chose the chair beside him anyway. When the clerk called her name, Beatrice walked to the table carrying the records. She laid them out one by one: the Kansas City receipt, the Territorial Road Fund entry, the survey, the altered promissory note, the freight invoices. She explained dates, amounts, distances, ink, no grand accusations, only sequence. Calvin's attorney challenged her twice. Beatrice answered both times without looking at William. William never interrupted, never finished her sentence, never stood to make himself part of her evidence. For once, his strength was in remaining seated. By late afternoon, the finding was clear. Mercer could not maintain exclusive private control over Red Willow access under the Territorial Road Authorization. The North Bench clause on William's note was referred for further examination because of the altered writing. Other ranchers immediately asked for their own accounts to be reviewed. Calvin's face went pale with anger, but the victory was not clean. The clerk separated the valid supply debt from the disputed charges. William still owed money, real money, enough that Broken Spur could not simply walk away. Outside the hearing room, Calvin caught him near the stairs. "I'll clear it." William stopped. Calvin lowered his voice. "Transfer North Bench voluntarily. Withdraw your objection on Red Willow. I cancel the rest." William looked down the hall. Several ranchers were waiting with their own Mercer papers in hand. Beatrice stood among them. Calvin followed his gaze. "You keep your herd. Keep your cash. Get through winter easy." William looked back at him. "No," Calvin's mouth hardened. "You'll sell cattle, then I'll sell cattle. Near a quarter of your non-breeding stock." William's expression did not change. "If that's what the honest debt costs." Calvin stared at him. William stepped aside and let him pass. That evening, Beatrice stood outside Wells' freight office while a cold wind moved down Main Street. Across the road, William loaded his coat into the wagon. He had won nothing cheaply. That mattered. He had not hidden the cost. That mattered more. Arthur came out behind her holding a telegram slip. "Stage office sent this." Beatrice unfolded it. "Eastbound connection through Coldwater. 2 days, Kansas City route available." Looked toward William. He had already climbed onto the wagon, for the first time since she had arrived in Colorado. The problem between them was no longer a debt. No one needed rescuing. William no longer needed her to save Broken Spur, and Beatrice no longer needed William Harper to stay in Coldwater. The wagon turned north. She watched until it disappeared beyond the edge of town. Then she looked down at the stage notice in her hand. 2 days. This time freedom would not be an escape. It would be a choice. 2 mornings later, Beatrice closed her valise. She had packed carefully. 2 dresses, her brush, the old Talbot papers, William's apology note, the unused return money. The room above Wells' freight office looked almost as it had when she moved in, except for the pencil marks beside the desk and the little tin cup she had bought for herself. Arthur stood downstairs sorting manifests when she came down. He looked at the valise. "Denver, maybe. Kansas City, maybe." Arthur scratched his jaw. "That's a troublesome answer for a man keeping freight records." Beatrice smiled faintly. "It's the only one I have." The door opened. William stepped inside. Cold air came with him. He wore the same brown work coat she remembered from the station. There was fresh mud on his boots, and a strip of rawhide showed where one glove had been repaired. His eyes found the valise, then hers. "Need a ride to the station?" Beatrice waited. No question about where she was going. No request that she stay. The road to the station was the same one they had traveled weeks earlier, but autumn had nearly surrendered to winter. Cottonwoods stood bare along the creek. Frost remained in the wagon ruts where the sun had not reached. The team's breath drifted white before them. William drove. Beatrice sat beside him beneath the same wool blanket he had once placed between them. Neither spoke about Mercer, or Broken Spur, or love. At the station, the eastbound coach stood beneath the freight shed. William lifted down her valise, then he took an envelope from his coat. Beatrice recognized it. The return fare. She looked at him. "You still mean what you said that first day," William understood. "That you're free?" "Yes." His gaze held hers. "Every day you're with me, or away from me." The station bell rang once. Beatrice tightened her fingers around the envelope. "And love?" Something shifted in his face. He looked toward the open road, then back at her. Wouldn't be worth much if I had to lock the gate to keep it. Boarding, the driver called. William set her valise beside her. Safe journey, Beatrice. Then he walked away. He did not wait to see what she chose. That was the hardest part. Beatrice watched him climb onto the broken spur wagon and turn the team north. The wheels rolled through the frozen ruts, farther, smaller. Gone behind the feed warehouse, ma'am. The ticket clerk waited behind his window. Beatrice looked down at the ticket in her hand. Kansas City, for months, she had thought returning there meant returning to herself. But the woman who had left Kansas City had possessed $11.40, no work, and a newspaper advertisement folded inside her satchel. The woman standing in Coldwater had employment, a reputation, skills people needed, a room she paid for herself, and a man she could walk away from. Beatrice stepped to the window. What can I get back for this ticket? Less than an hour later, William was nearly a mile outside town when he heard hoofbeats behind him. He pulled the team to the side. A bay mare came around the bend. Beatrice rode her. Her valise was tied behind the saddle. William stared, then glanced back toward Coldwater. Miss your stage? Beatrice reined the mare beside the wagon. No. Silence. A little smile touched her mouth. Changed where I was going. William looked at the valise. Broken spur, Coldwater first. The smile disappeared from his face, but not from his eyes. Beatrice continued. I'm keeping the job with Arthur. I'm keeping my room for now, too. William nodded. I want to save enough to open my own office. Accounts, copying, freight records. Sounds fair. She narrowed her eyes. That all you've got to say? William finally smiled. No. He picked up the reins. But it'll keep. Beatrice laughed, then turned the bay toward Coldwater. William did not ask her to climb into his wagon. He simply rode beside her back to town. Winter settled hard over the valley. Broken Spur sold nearly a quarter of its non-breeding cattle before Christmas. William paid the legitimate portion of his supply debt and spent long days stretching hay through the coldest weeks. Beatrice built something of her own. 2 days a week became 4 at Wells' freight office. Ranchers who had brought Mercer invoices to the county hearing began bringing other papers to her. Feed accounts, sale receipts, notes they could sign but did not fully understand. She charged for her work. William Harper became one of her customers. The first time he placed Broken Spur's cattle accounts on her desk, Beatrice looked at him. You're paying, I expected to. Full rate. Beatrice. Yes? I learned this lesson already. She tried not to smile. On Sundays, she sometimes rode to Broken Spur for supper. Sometimes she didn't. William never appeared at her room demanding to know why. When she did come, her gloves slowly found a place on the wooden peg beside his coat. One January evening, ice covered the North Trail. William stopped before the steepest section. Want me to lead June across? Beatrice considered the slope. Yes, he took the reins. A month earlier, he might have taken them without asking. She noticed the difference. So did he. They still disagreed. William once waited 3 days to tell her a buyer had backed out of a cattle purchase. Beatrice set down her pencil. You're doing it again. His shoulders sank. I know, then talk. So he did. It wasn't graceful, it was enough. By March, snow had begun pulling away from the south-facing hills. A small room beside Wells' freight office became available. Beatrice rented it. Arthur helped her move a desk. Edwin Foster made a bracket for the sign. William offered to hang it. Beatrice handed him the hammer. On a clear morning in early spring, the board went up. Beatrice Collins' accounts and copying, she stood across the street and looked at her own name. Not somebody's prospective wife, not Talbot's former clerk. Her name, her work, her door. One afternoon in early April, William entered the office. Beatrice was balancing a ranch account. He removed his hat. then sat in the chair across from her desk with it resting on one knee. She knew immediately this was not business. I put that advertisement in the paper because I thought I needed a wife. Beatrice leaned back. That seems to be what those advertisements are for. William ignored the joke. I thought a ranch needed a woman in the house to make it a home. His thumb moved once along the brim of his hat. I was wrong. Beatrice said nothing. I don't need somebody to fill an empty place. He looked at the account books stacked beside her. I want you, her breath caught. William continued. Your work, your stubbornness, that office, your right to tell me no when I'm being a fool. That's a considerable right. You'll need it. She smiled. William did not yet. Would you want to build a life with me? Beatrice turned toward the window. Her sign hung outside. Beyond it ran the road through Coldwater Crossing. She looked back at him. I'm keeping the office. William's shoulders finally eased. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. Then yes. For several seconds he simply sat there. Beatrice laughed softly. You could look happier. I am. You hide it poorly, never claimed otherwise. He stood. This time, when he reached across the desk, Beatrice met him halfway. Their wedding was small. Arthur Wells and Lewis Grant signed as witnesses. Martha Bell brought an apple pie. 3 broken spur hands arrived wearing clean shirts and expressions suggesting they would rather face a February cattle drive than a wedding ceremony. William stood before the preacher with his head slightly bowed because he was taller than everyone around him. Beatrice noticed. She smiled through half the vows. William noticed that too. By early April, meltwater ran down from North Bench. One evening, Beatrice rode home from Coldwater with her ledger bag tied behind the saddle. William was repairing the hinge on the broken spur gate. He heard June before he saw her. He stood. Beatrice rode toward him. William opened the gate. She passed through, then stopped. Behind her, the road stretched back toward Coldwater. Beyond that lay Denver, Kansas. Anywhere she chose. William waited beside the open gate. Beatrice looked toward the house. Smoke rose from the chimney. Her gloves had a peg beside the door. Her office waited in town for morning. Nothing had disappeared because she loved him. She turned in the saddle. You coming in? William set the hammer down. Thought you'd never ask. He closed the gate behind them, but he did not lock it. And maybe that was the truest promise William Harper ever made. Beatrice had come to Coldwater believing freedom meant keeping enough money in her dress to leave before anyone could claim her future. William had believed love meant carrying every burden himself, even if that meant hiding the truth from the person beside him. They both had something to learn. By spring, Beatrice still had her office in town, her own name painted above the door, and a road she could ride whenever she pleased. William still had a ranch that demanded hard work and uncertain winters. Neither had been rescued from life. They had simply learned how to face it without taking away the other person's choice. Perhaps that is why their love endured. Not because William was strong enough to make Beatrice stay, but because he became strong enough to let her leave. And not because Beatrice needed a man to give her a future, but because once the future belonged to her again, she chose to share it with him. Somewhere behind them, that unlocked gate stood beneath the Colorado evening sky. A way in, a way out, and a home she had chosen for herself. If you were Beatrice, would you have ridden back to William, or taken that stage east? Tell us in the comments, and if stories about hard-earned trust, second chances, and quiet love in the old American West still mean something to you, subscribe and stay with us. There are more roads ahead, and more stories waiting just beyond the next ridge.